Welcome to a fresh take on the news, putting you at the centre of the national conversation about the issues that matter to you most. Tonight, our Prime Minister is under investigation. The Commissioner of the country's biggest police force has resigned, and positive role models are seemingly in short supply. I'm Trevor Phillips, and this is The Great Debate. Each week, we get to the heart of the issue dominating the headlines. Tonight, as a crisis of leadership grips public life, our viewers panel from across the country will share their stories. They'll have their say, and they'll hold our studio guests to account. In the studio tonight, former Speaker of the House of Commons, John Bercow; Parm Sandhu, former Chief Superintendent in the Metropolitan Police; Greg Dyke, who's led organisations ranging from the BBC to the Football Association; and founder and CEO of BYP Network, Kike Oniwinde. The big question tonight: do we have the leaders we deserve? Let's start, as we always do, with our viewers panel and talk to Louise Brown. Louise, you're in Sunderland.
Hi. I just want to say I think our Prime Minister has let us down as leader of this country. My sister actually passed away during the lockdown restrictions of Christmas 2020. And when I heard about the Partygate scandal, my first thought was that I feel absolute immense guilt because I missed her last Christmas. And it's something that I thought really long and hard about before Christmas, because she had been seriously ill in intensive care before this. And I thought, should I just go and see her at Christmas? Who would know? Who would know about that? But I decided, no, the right thing it was to follow the lockdown restrictions. So now every time I hear about a new revelation about Partygate, I feel sick to my stomach. And like I say, extremely guilty that I didn't see her for her last Christmas. And in fact, I never saw her again. And when he's asked to resign, Boris Johnson apparently just sings about "I will survive." So it's a real slap in the face to British people.
Louise, do you specifically hold the Prime Minister responsible for your feeling of disgust?
Yes, I do, because he's the one that was announcing the rules, and to then pretend that he didn't know the rules at one point. He's the one who told the nation the rules, so I do hold him responsible, yeah. OK, stay there for a moment.
Let's go to Steve Diasher. Steve, what's your view about this issue of leadership?
Evening, Trevor, and the panel. So my view and style of this leadership is, quite frankly and easily, lockdown was hard for all of us. Somebody we all know has broken the rules. Nobody, we all followed the rules. Boris didn't follow the rules, as has other people, but then again, he's admitted to it, he's apologised to it, and now we've got to move on from Partygate. Let the police do what they need to do. We've got bigger things to worry about at the moment. We are a laughing stock on the world stage because of this. When we need to stop Boris and Keir Starmer locking horns, having a jibe at each other, when in reality, we need to be thinking and concentrating more about Russia and what they're going to do, and come together with NATO and put a show of unity together and get behind the Prime Minister and unite the country, and let's get things back on track.
All right, thank you, Steve. Let's go to Derrick Watson. Derrick, I think you've got a question for our studio.
Yes, Trevor. My question this evening is, this Valentine's Day, would you send Boris Johnson a letter of love or a letter of dismissal?
Thank you very much, Derrick. So, panel, Derrick's question. This Valentine's Day, would you send Boris Johnson a love letter or a letter of dismissal? Pretty on the money there. John Bercow.
Oh, without hesitation, I would send him a letter of dismissal. Never has a Prime Minister wielded so much power, made so little effective use of it, and been seen to be in quite such an indecent haste to blow his own trumpet. I've been aware of 12 Prime Ministers in my lifetime. By a country mile, Boris Johnson is the worst. He's a narcissist. He doesn't do the detail. He's ritually dishonest, having a nodding acquaintance with the truth at best only in a leap year. He is responsible for a catalogue of failures. He is the most inarticulate public speaker and Prime Minister I've ever known. He has no redeeming virtues. He's stayed there far too long. It is time that he gave up office and beetled off into the distance, which would be an enormous relief, not just to this country and to the European continent, but to the world. And one of these days, Trevor, I'll try to tell you what I really think.
Well, I was going to say, John, that it would be helpful if you got off the fence on this question, but do you genuinely mean that he has no redeeming virtues? You heard from Steve Dasher there. We're facing Putin. We're facing the aftermath of COVID. We're facing all kinds of things. And he would say that, of course, Boris Johnson has seen us through some of the worst days.
Yes, I don't buy that argument. I respect Steve's sincerity and I note his loyalty, but I don't buy that argument, and I'll tell you why. If you look at historical examples, there are many in which a sitting Prime Minister has been turfed out and easily and very capably replaced by someone else. Similar arguments were made about Margaret Thatcher, who was certainly a very dynamic and forthright leader in international affairs, of vastly greater competence and judgment than Boris Johnson, but she was replaced by John Major when there was talk of further wars, or there'd been conflict in the Gulf and so on. So the idea that you can't change the incumbent because of the present situation pertaining to the Ukraine is wrong. And with all due respect, the idea that President Putin is quaking at his boots at the thought of an inarticulate lecture from Boris Johnson is laughable.
Greg Dyke, you've got lots of experience as a leader and of leadership. Is there anything positive to be said about the Prime Minister?
Well, he's got charisma. He's known. You know, he's probably one of the best-known Prime Ministers we've ever had. But I don't think there's much else that's to be said in favour. I think you've really got to go back to the Conservative Party and say that they had no right to put this bloke as their leader in the first place. And most of the MPs you ever talked to, the Conservative MPs, wouldn't have made him leader. He became leader because of Brexit and what happened at that particular time. And I think the disaster was always going to happen. It was waiting to happen, and now it's happened. Now, I also believe he'll hang on. But I would think the Conservative Party at some stage realise that he's not going to win again.
Palm, where do you stand on this?
I think it's very difficult to be in those positions of leadership, but I think that if you lose the trust and confidence of either your party or the people who are supposed to support you, then you do need to look again at your style of leadership and whether or not you should be there. And it is about, for me, it's about accountability. And if there is no accountability, if you're setting the rules and then you're breaking them, then where does that accountability start and finish?
Kiko.
I'd give Boris a letter of dismissal. My only upset or frustration is I don't know who I would give a letter of love to replace him. And I think that's how many people feel. The Tory government in general has been so corrupt. I mean, we've seen one rule for them, one rule for everybody else. If it's not Partygate, it's giving contracts to their friends. It's, you know, not giving NHS workers a pay rise. It's giving themselves more expenses or pay rises. And it's just been frustrating to see. So many of us have really suffered during this pandemic period, and to see, you know, basically two halves, you know, rich getting richer, poor getting poorer, and a government that just doesn't seem to care for the people. And that's why it's hard. You know, you dismiss Boris Johnson, but who would replace him? And I think that's what a lot of us feel.
Well, of course, the question is, do we get the leaders we deserve? And in a sense, actually, what you're saying is, we haven't got a much choice right now.
Yeah, exactly. We don't have much choice, which is really, really frustrating. When I look at the Tory party, I generally don't know who would replace him. And when I look at Labour, like Keir Starmer, sadly, he just doesn't come across well to many people. He doesn't have much charisma. We don't know what he's saying. He doesn't appeal to the young people, or really anyone in general. So I think the country is just, confused at what to do. All
right. Let's go back to our viewers panel, and I want to talk to Jan Swaby, who I think has a view about this Prime Minister. Jan.
Yeah, I think we want too much from our political leaders, expecting their moral choices to be beyond reproach. It means that politicians are actually too busy trying to be liked rather than focusing on their job. Personally, I don't care if the politician has an affair, or in this case, a party during lockdown. I personally bent the rules a little, and I'm sure that a lot of other people did too. Whether Boris is morally questionable or not doesn't prevent him from making good political decisions that he believes are right for the country. If he's going to be given a vote of no confidence, then I think it should be because of bad political decisions and not his social life.
That's interesting, because I can see there's quite a lot of support from the panel from this point of view. Do you think that, when we discuss this question of Boris Johnson's capabilities, his leadership and so on, that we're focusing on the wrong aspects of his leadership to judge him?
Yes, I think we are. I think we should be looking at how he's handled the pandemic, how he's handling his political decisions, not what he's doing in his social life, if he's having a birthday party or not.
All right, well, let's stay there, because that's a very interesting point. Let's talk to Peter Jensko, who I think has a slightly different view on this issue of the importance of character. Peter.
Yeah, I absolutely believe that a politician's moral compass actually does affect their ability to be a good leader. If you can't tell the truth, if you cannot act with dignity to the office that you're in, then you're no good. Okay, all these people saying, "Oh, he's done this, he's done that." What he hasn't done is show respect for the British people, respect for the people that died, respect for the rules that he set. What makes me sick is the train of people that are sent out onto Sky, everywhere, day after day, to defend the absolute indefensible, and to say, and we're being gaslit all the time. And his moral compass is absolutely, fundamentally, directly in proportion to what a leader needs. If he's wishy-washy, if he lies, which he does and which he is, how can you take him seriously? How can you trust this man to make a political decision when he can't even tell the truth in Prime Minister's questions?
Hold it there for a second, Peter. Let me come back to you, Jan. Make the case to him that there's another way to look at this.
I just don't think politics should be based on personality. I think a political party is what we vote in, not the Prime Minister. It shouldn't be politics based on personality. It should be politics based on what the party stands for. And we spend too much time holding people to account and to standards that it's impossible for them to keep while they're in the public eye and under public scrutiny.
Greg Dyke, our audience is pretty well divided here, actually. Should we be judging Prime Minister on the basis of what he does or doesn't do with a cake?
Well, that's not the question. The question here is, were there a set of rules that the rest of us were following that they weren't? And it's as simple as that. And if it's in the end demonstrated and shown that they were breaking the rules, then they can't stay. It's as simple as that. It's not difficult. I mean, a lot of people had very difficult... We all went to odd funerals, odd things of people, and it was an incredibly difficult period. And to find out that, actually, there was something different happening inside Downing Street. There were parties after party, there was fun after fun, and they were joking about it, as you saw. That was the worst thing. They were joking about it. Now,
there is an investigation going on on that, Greg, so we need to be a little bit careful what we say about it. But the basic point is, did that make him a less good Prime Minister?
Yeah, well, I don't think he was a particularly good Prime Minister anyway, but it did make him a less good Prime Minister because you couldn't believe him. And once you can't believe the Prime Minister, you can't stay in the job. And I think, I mean, I haven't yet to meet anyone who voted for Johnson last time, anyone who voted against him who's changed their mind. And I think what has happened is there will be enough people who have changed their mind because of what he's done that they'll lose the next election with him.
All right. Coming up, as the Prime Minister travels to Scotland, do our leaders need to be one of us? Welcome back to The Great Debate, where this week we're asking, do we have the leaders we deserve? The Prime Minister is spending the start of his half-term break visiting Scotland as part of a levelling up tour of the UK. But, of course, Boris Johnson isn't the only leader who matters in British politics. Let's go straight to our viewers' panel and John Stoderberg in Lancaster. John, you think that there are better leaders elsewhere, possibly?
Yeah, it could be. It's a relative term. I think the question I would like to ask is, do our leaders need to be like us? It sounds a very simple question, but it covers a lot of complexities.
OK, thank you. John's question for you, our panel, is, do our leaders need to be like us? Greg?
If someone had told me when I was 20 that 50 years later, the Etonians would still dominate British politics, I wouldn't have believed it. I'd have thought this is not possible. So do they, it depends what you want. If you want them to win elections, clearly they can win elections. You don't have to be to win elections. Do they have to have come from a background where they understand some of the big issues of existence in this country? Yeah, I think it would be far better if they did.
John Bercow?
I don't think it's essential that they're like us. I think that the empirical evidence of who's led a party to election victory rather proves the point. Sometimes a leader can win support from the public precisely because of his peccadillos. And for quite a long time, that was true of Boris Johnson. I think people identified with the fact that he was a bit disorganised, a bit dishevelled, a bit discombobulated much of the time from one day to the next, not quite knowing what was next. And there was a sense in which I think people thought, well, I'm a bit like that, and therefore I don't hold it against him. And he did have a certain charm. I think that's now wearing thin. I think one respect, however, in which a leader does have to be like the public is having some basic sense of right and wrong, a responsibility to people, a real demonstration of the conviction that there's a we as well as a me. And that's where I think Boris Johnson falls down. He's completely about himself.
Palm?
I was just going to say that the leaders should be representative of our communities and changing Britain, because when you're talking about cost of living and you're talking about price rises and energy crisis, if you don't know how much your bill is, you don't know how much a loaf of bread is, how can you possibly represent our communities and the rest of Britain? And I think it's important that people do know, and they don't have to, you know, they have to worry about their bank accounts just like normal people do.
I'm going to come to you in a second, Kike, but let me first bring in Stephen Fairley in Scotland. Stephen.
I mean, the question is, do we have the leaders we deserve? In Scotland, we don't even have the leaders that we vote for, to be honest with you. We haven't had the Tories in power in Scotland in nearly 60 years, which is a long time. So that is one major issue. I mean, Boris was up in Scotland today, ticking the box, as they say, you know, visiting Scotland and ticking the box. And he's the best advert for independence when it comes to Scotland. He's the best advert for it because it doesn't have any moral compass. To be the leader of the UK, the UK is made up of 4 nations. He has to be in touch with the 4 nations and its people, and he's not. He's not in touch with any of the nations except maybe Eton or whatever. So no, he's not the leader we voted for in Scotland.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Kike, here's an example. It's a general principle. To what extent does a leader really have to feel like he or she is part of the tribe?
I think the question is, what is the tribe? I think one thing I've noticed with the UK is that it's so divided. You know, each one of us here are different, for example. We have different backgrounds, privileges, etc. So I would say, OK, you know, I'd love a leader that's more like the working class, that came from nothing to something, or that understands what's going on the ground, so that understands heat or eat is a real thing, and it isn't just pull yourself by your bootstrap and, you know, go have that little sandwich and have less showers. You know, when you hear some of the things that are being said to the general public in order to deal with the current crisis, it's just like you're so out of touch. What is going on?
Yeah, I get that, but let me give you an example. I mean, it's the example of all examples. People will say, who is Britain's greatest leader ever? Always Churchill.
War leader.
Well, most people would say greatest leader, and he was the descendant of dukes. He was born in a palace. He was always rich. He led in war with many privations and so on, but people would still say, this is the person we identified with.
Yes, because it was an overriding goal in a situation without precedent, and he was almost universally judged to be the best person for the job. That is completely different, Trevor, from the situation we find today. And I suppose the question I'd like to lob into the pot, well, it's very simply this. Does that leader get up in the morning and strain every muscle and sinew to better the lot of people less fortunate than him or her? Nobody in all conscience can say Boris Johnson does that. Keir Starmer...
Let me go back. Let me stick with Kike for the moment.
It's a lack of empathy. It's a lack of understanding that there are people that are truly suffering. I think if Boris and a lot more people in the Tories, maybe more the moderate Tories, can actually understand that people just need better, you know, better healthcare, better jobs, NHS need better pay, you know, give us the energy cap. That didn't have to happen, but instead it's all about profits for the biggest businesses. During COVID, there's been this K-shaped recovery. I've seen it. I'm on the line of like both sides, and the rich are getting richer in ways that I've never. It's incredible to see, whereas the poor people are truly suffering. So if we just had a leader who understands that and cares about the actual citizens, you know, being the best that they can, representing the global economy, then we'll do better as a country. So we need better leaders.
Let's go to Kathleen Morris. Kathleen Morris, there are other ways in which people can identify with their leaders, not necessarily geographically. I think you've got a view about male and female leaders.
I certainly have. You know, female leaders, they tend to look at things differently. We're more creative with our ideas on how to solve problems. We aren't afraid to take tough decisions, but we do it compassionately. A female leader would most definitely not have loaned £200 to the utility companies and asked us, Joe Public, to pay it back. A female leader is, if you're looking into your history, we've got Angela Merkel, Golda Meir, Indira Gandhi, and Margaret Thatcher. Why is it so difficult for the men to take direction from female leaders or bosses? The percentage of male and females in the world is 50.4% men and 49.6% female. And we are certainly... Go on.
No, just quickly, Kathleen, just checking. I noticed that Theresa May wasn't in that list.
She hadn't time. Well, yeah, all right, we'll put Theresa in because she was a good leader if she'd have been allowed to stay in her job. OK,
thank you. Let's stay there. Parm Sandhu, you were, you are a female and a female leader. Do you think Kathleen's right?
I think that there are some people within our society who do find it very difficult to take instructions, orders, you know, for us it was orders, instructions, or to actually work for female bosses. You were in a pretty male environment. Yeah, and I have actually had people in my office who have said, well, you can't say that to me, where I've ended up throwing them out of the office type thing, because some men especially, let's not beat around the bush, it's men, don't like taking instructions from women. And there is that little to and fro before you have to prove yourself to be as good as, if not twice as good as your colleagues, just to get your point across. And even like, if I could just add one more thing, because there's myself and there were a couple of other female leaders in different industries, and we actually put together this group called the He-Peating Group, and that's because male colleagues would repeat what we'd said and it would be heard, whereas when we said it, it just wasn't heard.
OK, thank you. We're going to talk about a woman leader now. You're watching The Great Debate. Up next, Priti Patel starts looking for a new Met Police Commissioner. But does it matter who chooses our leaders? You're watching The Great Debate. Do we have the leaders we deserve? The person in charge of the country's biggest police force resigned a few days ago. Dame Cressida Dick said she was left with no choice after the Mayor of London made it clear he didn't have confidence in her leadership. Today, the Federation representing rank-and-file officers has said it has no confidence in Sadiq Khan. Now it's up to the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, to find the right leader to replace Dame Cressida. Let's kick things off with a question from Simon White on our viewers' panel. Simon, what's your view about this?
Well, who should choose our leaders? Obviously, Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, is about to appoint the new Commissioner of the Met Police. And yet I, for one, am uncomfortable with this link between the police and the ruling party in Parliament. To govern us properly, we have to have a Parliament that sets the rules, but a police force that then applies them fairly without favour. And things happening at the moment worry me. For instance, the Downing Street inquiry into Partygate. There's no doubt that Boris Johnson was definitely helped by the fact that the Met Police inquiry has held up the full report. Now, I'm not saying there's collusion, but the fact that there is scope for people to suspect collusion is just not good for anybody. We need to be confident that the police are acting fairly in all our interests. And it worries me when we see things like this happen.
And you've got a question for our panel then?
Well, who should choose our leaders is basically the question for the panel. Should it be down to the Home Secretary to choose the new Commissioner of the Met Police?
Thank you, Simon. So there's Simon's question for you. Who should choose our leaders? Pom Sandhu. It's really a sharp question for this choice of the nation's top cop, isn't it?
I think we've ended up in a very difficult situation because politics and policing should never have been mixed and they should always have been kept separate. But we've got ourselves into a legislative mess where it can only be the Home Secretary in conjunction with the Mayor of London. But it doesn't matter whether they're Conservatives, Labour or any other political party. That's what the legislation says. But I do agree that politics and policing should never, ever have been allowed to mix in this way, because there is that perception now where the public are thinking they're investigating the government. Are there favours being done, as your guest just said?
All right, I'm going to come back to you on that. But let me ask another person who has worn the uniform, James McLeod. James, what is your view about this?
I have to agree totally, Trevor, with the superintendent there, basically, that politics and police should never mix. Never in a million years should they be mixing the two of them together. I was a rural cop for the best part of 20 years, so I can't even imagine what it's like policing a big city from that point of view. However, from the Met's point of view, the policing performance in recent times hasn't been the best, has it? From the WhatsApp groups to the policing of a vigil for a female murdered by an officer, right through now to the Downing Street parties that they weren't going to investigate and then decided to investigate. It's been a complete and utter embarrassment, if truth be told. However, my point would be, if Clarissa Dick is to resign because of her actions of people in an organisation that she's the commander of, should the same rules not be applied to our political elite?
Let's come back into the studio. Kike, there is an issue here, isn't there, that somebody may be really liked by the rank and file, and we gather that was probably true about Cressida Dick, but actually the public pays for the police, and the public and their representatives should maybe have the upper hand in deciding who gets to run that organisation. What do you think?
Yeah, I believe that the public should actually vote for who should be the new commissioner.
As they do in America, they vote for.
Yeah, this is
the commissioner of police.
We know there's
and so on.
Yeah, exactly. We know that currently that the public do not have much faith in the police. We feel like they belong to the government and they don't care about us, the everyday people. And to have Priti Patel choose a new commissioner is probably the worst thing that can happen. That sets us back even further, you know, than Cressida Dick. So I think that the public should vote. Why not do something different? Why not show us the top 5 and then we investigate who the potential new recruit is, and then we vote. But I don't think Priti Patel should have a hand in it because her policies are shocking. I think she's probably one of the worst hated MPs there is. So that's my own personal
Let's not go down that road. Pardon, quickly.
I was just going to add to Kike's comments there. It's really important to have the trust and confidence of our communities. And if you haven't got the trust and confidence of our communities, you cannot police by consent.
Yeah. But just very quickly, if you put that job out to a vote, isn't that politics straight away?
Why? No. That's the public voting. That's not politicians voting. I actually think that's a really good idea.
James, what do you think? There's the idea of putting the job of police commissioner or similar jobs out to a vote by the public.
How would the public know how that particular police officer out of 5 of them perform? It has to be a police officer in charge of the force. It cannot go out to industry, etc., because then it does become politicised. I understand the feelings, but I do think it has to be a police officer in charge. And how is the public going to know who to vote for?
All right, OK. Let's Greg, let's. I don't want to go too far into your extensive biography, but of course you were the boss of the BBC and famously very popular with the staff, not so popular with the government. But
with the governors more than the government.
Or the people who the government had appointed.
And I upset the government of the day, but or the BBC did. I think this is an incredibly tough job to run the Met because culturally the organisation is in need of significant change. And it's a big organisation. How do you get in? You've got to get in at the bottom to get that change. You won't do it by saying somebody sitting in the headquarters and saying, right, now we're going to be like this, because it won't happen. You've got to persuade the people who work for you to support what you are doing. And that makes it a very difficult job. But it's probably doable if you get the right person. I'm not confident that the politicians will choose the right person.
All right. Crisilda Basu. Good evening, Crisilda. I think you've been with us before. What do you make of this debate about who chooses the leader?
One person cannot do that job. I think it needs more than one person to do that job.
Oh, that's interesting. But what happens if they disagree? I mean, somebody's got to make the decisions, don't they?
Yes, but you still need a team. With Cressida, I didn't see a team behind her at all. If there was a crisis, she was there on her own, stood on her own, and making all the decisions, where, to me, there should be a team that makes that decision. If there's a crisis in another country, a devastating crisis that happened, you know, to our women in this country, there would be a team that would discuss or tell the public what exactly had happened and what they're going to do.
OK, thank you, Crisilda. Malcolm Severin, what's your view about this issue that's arisen in the last week?
Good evening. Well, can I just say, first of all, that leaders, excellent leaders, do lead by example. And to be an excellent leader, you are held to a moral compass that is higher than the people you're leading. Yeah. So I think, as Palm said, it's essential that the police maintain the trust and the respect of the public they are employed to serve. Too many senior appointments nowadays are dictated by wokeness rather than the ability of the individual to do the job.
OK, Kike, wokeness, problem in leadership.
So So the question on wokeness, I think, I mean, going back to Boris, that's a white male who is not the greatest leader. So I think what we're looking for is someone who's right for the job, but we need to look far and wide and find the right people. Like I said, Priti Patel, you know, she's an Asian woman, but so many people don't identify when they look at Priti Patel. Her views are very different to so many other people. So I think it's about finding the right leader who, again, is for the people, especially when it comes to, you know, the Met Commissioner. I think at the moment the community is just so divided with the police. I would love to see a police force that is out on the street, smiling, helping citizens, helping people, and just, you know, letting us know that they've got our backs, not making us feel like, oh my God, there's police behind me, let me sit up tight. And I think that the right leader is someone that will come forward and show that they want to make a difference in the police force.
OK, there may be a different pathway to that. Let's talk about that. Coming up on the great debate, forget about those in power. What about the everyday, inspirational leaders who are often the most important role models? This is the great debate, where our guests and viewers panel are discussing, do we have the leaders we deserve? Let's start with Jordan Sykes in our viewers panel. Jordan, you're a primary school teacher. Who do you look to for leadership? I obviously myself try to be a good role model as much as possible. I think we could always look to those that are currently in power. But I personally think there's obviously my profession and lots of other professions who try to be good role models, and we probably feel like we're maybe not promoted or supported in the best way by those in power at the moment. So you are dealing with young people. So you've got a question about that for our panel, I think. Yes. So do you think our government should be doing more to give young people good role models, as well as promoting those people who could be good role models as well? Thank you very much. OK, Kike, that finger is pointing at you on this as the one authentically young person. What do you think? Absolutely. I mean, that is the #1 thing the government should be doing. I remember I tweeted once that Marcus Rashford should be Prime Minister. That's how much of a better job he was doing. And I think that, but that's sad that, you know, we had to get... Don't say that to a Manchester City fan, but yeah, there's so many people on the ground doing incredible work every single day that care about people genuinely, that don't get to be seen. They're not visible. And so many people feel despondent because they're not seeing that role model visibility. Everything we get on the news is negative news every single day. But we just want to see people who have, you know, done great work. They've, you know, done well in their careers. Maybe they're entrepreneurs, they're social activists, people that just inspire other people to also do great work. I think we've lost that in the world. We've lost the fact that we're just here to, yeah, we have to have shelter, we have to have food, but we're ultimately here to serve other people and help other people do better. And I think the government should be promoting that, showing people in their neighbourhoods that maybe grew up in, I'm from Barking and Dagenham originally, so showing people in Barking and Dagenham that are doing great work, you know, in the UK and across the world, and just letting people know that they can aspire to greatness. But I think what we have is a government that are privileged. They grew up, you know, in a world where they were told from young they are going to be the leaders. This is what it is. And they're so disconnected from everyday people that they don't see the need. To be fair, I don't think that's true about everybody who's in government, but I take the point. John Bercow, do you think that everyday leadership can do something to counter the kinds of problem that we've been talking about so far about national leadership? Everyday leadership can do something to counter the prevalent cynicism, but it has to be much better than it is now. It has to display empathy, and it has to demonstrate that words are followed by deeds. The problem at the moment at the heart of government is that I don't see or hear many ministers who demonstrate empathy with the people whom they're intended and required to serve. And I constantly hear ministers mouthing the mantra, or the Prime Minister himself doing so, I take responsibility. And I'm left asking, what do those words mean when you want other people to lose their jobs so you can keep yours? If I can put it in a sentence, the one leader I found more impressive in my time in office than anyone else
was the Speaker's chaplain, who is now the Bishop of Dover, the Right Reverend Rose Hudson Wilkin. Every day she went about her work thinking of others, ministering to others, caring about others, putting herself in the position of others. I don't see anyone in this government who begins to hold a candle to her.
Let's go back to our viewers panel and talk to Nicholas Stevenson. You also come from the education sector. What's your view about this everyday leadership point?
I wake up every morning privileged to do my role. I'm a CEO of a multi-academy trust in Newcastle, and I'm very much a public servant. I am there to serve the community, I am there to serve the children, and I'm there to be a role model. I'm there to be judge for parents, I'm there to be a social worker and nurse. I love my job, and there are so many great community leaders out there who equally love their job because the parents know that we speak truth, we have empathy with their situation. I feel part of the community, I don't live in it, but I'm certainly a key member of that community. And I will ultimately take responsibility properly for anything that would go wrong in any of the schools that I run. I will hold my head up and I speak the truth to people. And I think that's all this country wants, is somebody who's telling the truth, who understands where people are coming from and is doing the best job they can from the moment they wake up.
Palm, maybe we're looking in the wrong place for the ideal of leadership, and the great leaders are perhaps the ones whose names we don't often mention on TV.
I think often you will find those great leaders and they will be closer to home, because I think all of us would remember that one teacher that motivated you, that made you do that little bit more studying and made you think that you could achieve. Because my background wasn't great, but I had somebody who believed in me when I was very, very young, who pushed me. And, you know, when things get tough, you think about that person as a role model who can actually make a difference and influence. And there are some sports individuals who are those leaders, and those two teachers, absolutely hat off to them, because they will make an impact on a huge number of young people as they're growing up. And if you can make that differentiation or make that difference when they're young, then of course that will follow through when they're older, and they'll always remember that change.
Greg?
I think leadership is two things. One, you've got to have the right strategy for whatever organisation you're running. You've got to have, if you've got the wrong strategy, you're stuffed anyway. But secondly, you've got to get the people who work for you, the people who are your clients, on side. And that's difficult. That takes a lot of time. And sometimes the two are so separate. The strategy, you've got a strategy to get somewhere, but you can't get the people to do it. And you can't get to do it because you haven't put yourself on the line, really. You haven't gone out there and tried to say, look, come on, this is what I'm trying to do. This is why we're trying to do it. Come with us. But that's done through, we had a brief discussion earlier about whether our leaders, is it best to be loved or is it best to be feared? It's best to be loved. I have no doubt about that at all. It's best to be loved and respected, because then they'll give you the opportunity that even if you get it wrong, fine.
Well, that's all we have time for this evening. It just remains for me to say thanks to our panellists here in the studio. Greg Dyke, Kike Onowinde, John Burko and Palm Sandhu. Of course, it's you at home who are at the centre of this conversation. And if you'd like to be part of the programme next time, get in touch. Email us at thegreatdebate@sky.uk. For now, I want to thank everybody on our wall and our viewers panel for your contributions and your active interventions. We can see you there. And also, you at home, keep talking, and we'll see you again at the same time next week for The Great Debate.